Hello, welcome in. How are you? I actually hope that you're doing a little bit better than me. My voice is a bit nasally, so hopefully you can you can stand it. It doesn't become a deterrent. But I've been fighting something all week, and thanks to my son who brought it home and has been passing it around generously. And so, but the show must go on. So here we are. Today, I want to talk to you about how you can give somebody a raise, you can change the title, you can move them off of hourly to salary, and perhaps notice that over the next few weeks that they're operating exactly the same way they did before. And maybe you were expecting something different. You were expecting a different shift. You were expecting them to pick up on some things. Now, this is not a dig at the employee. What it really is about understanding that just by simply changing those things, the role, bringing them into a salary, even maybe a contractor into a full-time employee, it's not a domino effect by just changing that one thing. All the other elements are going to fall into place. And so I want to talk about what some of those gaps are, identify those things. And this actually came about because I was talking to another business owner, another entrepreneur, and she recently elevated a handful of her staff from hourly employees to salary. And she discovered pretty quickly that the paycheck changed, but not so much the mindset. So today we're going to unpack that. What does it actually mean to think like a salaried employee versus an hourly one? Why is the transition so much harder than just bumping someone's pay? Why doesn't all the things just fall into place after that? And I want to take a look at some of the real blockers for both the employee and the leader or the employer, and maybe identify how to bridge that gap. So, what we're really talking about, and I want to maybe define some terms here, some of the issues, the challenges that we have. Now, I do want to say up front, this is not about legal classifications. It's really just about mindset. And just because the designation changes, hourly to salary, contractor to full-time employee, the brain doesn't automatically change with it. Now, most of us have either been this employee, we started out, usually most of us started with some kind of hourly job, and or we are managing or have managed this employee, and now they're on our team and we're leading them. And really the difference between someone doing their job and someone and really, it's the difference between someone doing their job and someone thinking about the business or thinking about the team or extending what they're doing beyond just their role. So first, let me define just some of the terms here. So the hourly versus salary. First, I want to break down the hourly mindset when it comes to the relationship to work. Here, it really is about their product. The product is here, their time is the product. They're trading dollars for hours, right? I come in from this time to this time, and this is what you're asking me to do. So it's very transactional when it comes to the relationship with work, and the effort is conditional. You pay me X for X amount of hours to do these particular tasks. And in those hours, I will wait to be told what to do, and I will do what's assigned to me. That's what you're paying me for, and that's fair. And there's a lot of roles to where that's necessary, and that's all that it is. Again, this is not a dig on good or bad or high or low. It's just the difference between the different mindsets. Now, in the hourly mindset, there is a low ownership of outcomes. The results, they're really somebody else's problems. I just did what you told me to do. You don't necessarily pay me to think beyond that. You pay me to do. So here's a list of things. I'll take care of them. Another hourly mindset is some of the very clear boundaries. I stay in my lane, I execute, but I'm not necessarily going to extend outside of that. And again, this might be very important for certain types of roles. But leaders, and I do hear this from business owners and from leaders, they might see this and think about it differently. They may look and go, well, can't you tell that that over there needs taken care of? And they might see it as a form of laziness. But really, sometimes it's more of a form of self-protection. People are and get afraid of giving extra because if they think you're going to take advantage of it, they're afraid that, if I do you a favor or give you extra, then that becomes the expectation rather than the exception. Now, that may not be your intent. You may not be thinking it that way, but sometimes as bosses, as leaders, we will unintentionally cross these boundaries. And instead, we should be just as protective as those boundaries as they are, and making sure that you understand what some of those boundaries are. And, when you are moving someone from hourly to salary, or when you are giving them different types of responsibility, it's about giving them permission to tell you when that's not what I'm trying to say. Give your employees permission to tell you when you might be crossing the line or crossing the boundaries. That takes away some of the fear of the expectation that you have. And as a result, people do and will protect themselves. When the clock strikes quitting time, doesn't matter what I'm doing, I'm out. Otherwise, if the boss sees me here, they're going to ask me to do something else. And so sometimes that's just the mindset. It's like, here, I'm here from this time to that time. I'm doing what I'm doing, and that's it, nothing more. And that's okay. And there are certain roles that require that. Now, on the other hand, if we look at the salary mindset, and you want to consider, if you're moving someone from hourly to salary, from contractor to a full-time employee, what are some of the things that you might be looking for, or what are some of the things you want to talk to them about? So the shift for you as a leader is that output and results are the product, not just the time spent. So shifting their mindset around clocking in 9 to 5 versus, now we're looking at, what is the output? What's the product? What are the things that you own? That becomes the output. That's where the value is. The salary mindset also, there's a flexible ownership. As a salaried employee, you might be thinking, well, I connect the dots and I think beyond the task. There's more to it than just my piece of it. My piece, I get inputs from other places, and my inputs become outputs into something else that is going on ahead or beyond me. And there's also proactive thinking. So instead of being reactive, they might anticipate what is coming up. And another difference is with salary is the identity is tied to the role and the mission, and not just the clock, not just about clocking in or out. Now, neither of these mindsets has anything to do with character or character flaw. A lot of it has to do with a rational response to either how someone's been trained, how they've been managed, how they've been paid, and more importantly, how they've been set up in this role. So how are we setting people up as they come in? So speaking very specifically about transitioning someone from hourly to salary, what makes that transition so challenging? Reclassifying a role doesn't automatically recondition the mindset. I remember when I left corporate to be full-time in my practice, there were some mindset shifts that I knew that I needed to make just to make that leap. There's a whole process I needed to go through. But once I made that leap, there was a whole nother set of mindset shifts that I didn't even know I needed to make until I was presented with them. There's no business owner, entrepreneur download that I could plug into and get everything in my head to make all of those adjustments immediately. I had to be very intentional about dealing with all of these blockers that got in my way of slowing myself down with what I was doing at the very beginning. So the challenges that do affect this kind of transition also applies in this case. So let's start with the fear of exploitation. So when I said, hey, if I stay too late, or if I do too many favors, then the boss is going to think that that's how it's supposed to be all the time. Well, maybe that shows up as another question. Am I working more for less money? Now that I'm salary, are there no guardrails? Does that mean I have to be available for work all the time? I was talking to my friend and she was like, well, one of the employees, she never takes her laptop home. Now, maybe that's a conversation that wasn't had around the expectations on after 5 o'clock. Does that mean, is there anything that needs to be done? Maybe that shows up as a question. Am I working more for less money? Now that I'm a salary employee, are there no guardrails? Well, not at all. But a lot of times people don't know the difference, particularly if you haven't had a conversation with them. This is a conversation. Where are things more flexible and where are the guardrails? What are the expectations? She was talking about how one of the employees won't take her laptop home with for fear of, well, that means I have to be working all and be available all evening. And that's not necessarily the case. So, what are some of the flexibilities that you have? Because it's not necessarily time bound, if it's based on outputs or if it's based on, hey, what are some of the deadlines now that we need to make sure that what are some of the deadlines we need to hold to? That might mean occasionally there might be a little bit of extra work, coming in a little bit early, staying a little bit late. But at the same time, are you flexible with if you have a regular doctor's appointment, you just need to go get a checkup, you don't have to worry about there's no clocking in, clocking out, or having to take time off for that. Just go to your doctor's appointment. You need to leave a little bit early to pick up your kid, no problem. But that might require that you spend a little time later finishing up some things that we might need for the next day. So that conversation is a very important conversation to have, and talking about where those boundaries live and exist is something that you both can agree on for them to live with and what's expected of this role. Another important distinction is moving from passive to active ownership. I guess I'll put it that way. Now, personally, I think this should happen before the transition, meaning if you know that this is someone you're thinking about elevating, or someone that's emerging in your organization, you want to start as soon as possible, helping them to take more ownership of the things that they're responsible for. But what does that look like in practice? As a leader, are there processes that you can hand over? And once you hand that process over and really giving the ownership, are you letting go? Or are you constantly stepping in and micromanaging? That might mean you have to let them do it differently than you. And I'll give you an example. Recently, there are a couple processes that I am taking off of my plate and I'm giving to my program manager, Felice. And one of the processes, and it's a relatively new process, is we've been getting some inquiries about people wanting to come onto the podcast, which that's fantastic. And hopefully we'll have some really good conversations coming up in some future episodes. But I was handling it willy-nilly. At first, I was just ignoring all of them. But then I thought, well, maybe I should pay attention. Maybe there's some good things here. Maybe we can have some good episodes here. So I talked to Felice about taking that on, asked her if it was something she was interested in taking on, and then we came up with a rudimentary process. And then I said, okay, you own this process. It's yours. Now, the first couple times, the first couple run through, she came back and asked me some questions. She wasn't sure if this person was a good fit or not. And I had to tell her a few times, I trust your judgment. And actually, I learned a lesson from that, because there was one person that she was like, I'm not sure, but I think this is probably a no. And we discussed it. And I was like, you know what? Yeah, I'll talk to her. Well, I should have listened to Felice because it wasn't necessarily a good fit. But now she owns that process completely. All I want to know is when someone shows up on the calendar for a pre-podcast, kind of a prep call, I can go to the notes and see how I need to be prepared for that meeting with them. But she owns that, and I step completely out of the way. But it took a couple of rounds, and she has the autonomy to make some of the changes that are necessary because she's the one that's going to see where there are gaps. Now, with that, and when people do some of these things, there is a step up into a bigger role, which also means more visibility. And sometimes people need time for that to settle. When you're playing small, you get comfortable in your role, but when you take a bigger step, that visibility might be uncomfortable at first. And so people need a little bit more time to wrap their head around that and to settle into that. And then another transition, another thing that gets in the way here is, helping them to identify where to best spend their time and energy. So those are some of the challenges. Another challenge to this transition is when people aren't sure how to best spend their energy. And we have to help them to transition from thinking about, well, if the conditions aren't perfect and I'm blocked, so therefore I stop. These are just some of the challenges when it comes to transitioning from one type of role to another. It's not about calling people out. It's understanding where they are and the environments that reinforce certain behaviors. There are some organizations that train an hourly mindset. Some jobs require it. Some leaders reward it. And then some roles literally trap people in that type of mindset. So, as leaders, it's necessary to address the issue, not just the outcome. And those are some of the mindset blockers. So, now let's talk about what gets in the way on both sides of this coin. Now, on the employee side, I'm speaking from the person that's now moving and have this new role. It's really hard to be energized when you have no visibility into the bigger picture. If I'm not sure how my role feeds into other roles or how I can make a difference or what I'm doing connects dots in other places, it's really difficult to get excited and to be energized about that. I remember a long time ago, I was in some training and they were showing a picture of two bricklayers. You probably have seen this. And they were asking each of them, what do you do for a living? And the one guy goes, and he was kind of tired and he had a small brick of layers. He was kind of a small brick of layers. No, he had a small wall that he was building. And he was like, well, I'm a bricklayer. I'm simply building a wall here. And then you look at the other guy and he looked a little bit more energized and his wall looked um and his wall was a bit bigger and it was more aligned, and asking him, well, what do you do? And he said, well, I'm helping to build a castle. And it's just that small mindset shift that can make a difference between the kind of energy that someone puts into the role when they know that what they're doing has a greater impact than just the task at hand. So if you don't know why your work matters, you just do the task that's in front of you. And so, when there's very little vision for what's next, then you're not going to look beyond that. Another thing that gets in the way on the employee side is a lack of autonomy. We talked about micromanaging. If you give someone a process, are you stepping out of the way to allow them to actually handle it and take the ownership of it? One that I catch a lot is unclear expectations. Leaders, in their mind, it makes sense. In their mind, it's very clear, but they haven't laid out the expectations. They haven't been very transparent in what good looks like, good, better, best, what that looks like. And so, from the employee's perspective, I'm just guessing here. I'm not totally sure. And then, coupled with that, sometimes there's no safety net to take an initiative or to fail. And when people are afraid to take a chance, because if they think all that's going to happen is they're going to get in trouble, or if they're thinking about, well, I don't want to rock the boat, or if they're thinking about, I don't want to upset anyone, it's not going to go beyond just the tasks that are in front of them. So those are some of the things that totally block and get in the way of someone stepping into the role. On the flip side, on the leadership side, sometimes leaders change the title without actually updating the management style. If you're still micromanaging hours instead of managing outcomes, if you're still micromanaging in general, that's an issue. If you haven't shifted the way that you see this employee's role, you can't expect them to see it any differently. And you can't expect for them to act differently if you're still treating them the same. So you also have to level up and change your management style to meet the role that you're asking them to take. The other thing is when there are no real conversations or there's no onboarding about the mindset shift that's required for this role. This is big. We onboard someone into a new job description. That's not enough. We have to also onboard them into a different way of thinking about the role. So that piece of it, not just the skills and not just what you're expected to do, but also here's how you can think about what you're doing differently. And then as I said, expecting the employee to just get it without any guidance or any modeling from you. That's a hard shift to make if in your mind it's very clear because you're thinking about these things. You have more information than what they have. They don't have as much knowledge. And so you have to pull them in and fill them in on what's going on. A big important aspect to this, even talking about Felice here too, is you know, she is paid hourly, but she doesn't have an hourly mindset. And some of that is because of some of her background, but I also think a lot of that is because I talked to her about what we're doing as a business, and she's bought into what we're doing. She's bought into the bigger picture of what we're trying to accomplish here. And she's also taken some ownership into some of those things and has a passion for it. And that shows up and that helps both of us to move things forward. In addition to the contractors that also come in and help us to do different things. So onboarding someone into a new job description simply is just not enough. And as an owner, as a manager, as a leader who has elevated someone, and you might be wondering why nothing has really changed, first look at how you set them up. Identify what these gaps are and have the necessary conversations that include answers to some of the questions, things like why this role is important. Why are they the right person? What's in it for them? That's a big one. What's in it for them? What's in it for me if I start taking my laptop home and if all that means is I'm just doing more work? Is that really something that's in it for them? So how do we shift that conversation so they understand some of the benefits, but also how what they do impacts a bigger and broader story for the organization? And also what mindset shifts are important for this role. And of course, you want to get their thoughts on this topic as well. You want to get their thoughts about how they feel about the role, what they think they can do differently. What are some of the areas that they're not sure about? Making yourself available to answer those questions. Now, this is not a one-time conversation. Consider this an ongoing conversation. And these are things that you can totally follow up on in your one-on-ones when you're having those check-ins with them. Talk to them about how they're doing, how they're transitioning. What are some things where they might be feeling stuck? And that way you can identify what the key issues are. Because I really believe that the more we set people up for success, the smoother and faster this transition will be. Now, I hope this episode gave you some insight. I know I'm a little foggy today, but if it did give you some insight, share it with someone who might need to hear it. Drop a review, and I'll see you next time.